COP yet. It's not even a COP yet. So we can keep it
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah.
broad-based.
It's like a cop in the making. So
Yeah, exactly. That's the right way to put it.
yeah. All right. So, we
You're
are
live.
live. Hello and welcome to the Hindus coverage of the Global Plastics Treaty, which is taking place at Busan in South Korea. Now, let me just quickly run you over something to give you a context. According to the United Nations Environment Program, approximately 19 to 23 million tons of plastic waste enters the aquatic ecosystems annually, polluting our lakes, rivers, and the Earth's oceans. This contributes an estimated 75 to almost 200 million tons of plastic already present in our oceans right now. This influx of plastic pollution can alter habitats and natural processes, reducing the ecosystem's ability to adapt to climate change and, of course, directly affecting millions of people's health and livelihoods and the Earth's food production capabilities. Moreover, UNEP reports that every day the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes. So, to address this, we have what is being dubbed as a COP in the making. But to address this global health hazard, representatives from 175 countries met in March of 2022 in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, during the United Nations Environment Assembly and agreed to develop a legally binding agreement to end plastics pollution by the end of this year, that is 2024. Now, since the first meeting in Kenya in 2022, there have been two more such meetings of what are beginning to mirror the Conference of Parties or COP meetings under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change or UNFCCC. The crucial meeting to finally decide on a roadmap to end this plastic pollution is currently underway at Busan, as I just had mentioned. And we have with us the Hindus Jacob Koshy, who has been there for the past couple of days. The set of meetings began on the 25th of November and are going to go on till the 1st of December. So, Jacob, thank you so much for joining us. And I understand it's about 3.5 hours ahead, and you are already in a jacket and you're pretty cold over there.
Yes.
So let me jump right in. Firstly, if you can, really give us a context of what are the questions, what is animating the decision makers there, and also when they say this is going to be legally binding, what does that mean?
Yeah. So thanks, Kunal. Pleasure to join you from South Korea over here. So just a quick clarification. So this is actually the fifth negotiations meeting. So there have been 4 meetings, not really 2, but unusually for UN-based multilateral meetings like this, from 22 to 24, we've already had 4 meetings, and this is the 5th one. So basically, 2 meetings have been happening every year. So this is one of the sentiments.
The urgency that they seem to be attaching to this.
Yes, exactly. So in fact, yesterday at this press conference over here, the UNEP president, Inger Anderson, she actually pointed out that, it took 21 COPs, 21 COPs for something like the Paris Agreement to actually, take shape, where the world finally formally decided that, we have to keep temperature rise from, below 2 degrees and as far as possible 1.5.
Pre-industrial levels, yeah.
This was still, and this is when the first COPs actually met in 1995, and 3 years before that you had the famous the Rio summit in Rio de Janeiro, which is where countries actually decided that climate change is
actually a thing.
Is a problem. Is a problem, and we need to do something about it. Yeah. So as far as plastics is concerned, we are actually at the equivalent of that Rio de Janeiro summit. We are actually in the 1992 version yet. That is so. This 5th meeting, according to the UNEA resolution that you mentioned earlier, this 5th meeting is technically supposed to be the last where countries have to come up with the equivalent of the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. You have to come up with the equivalent of this. It'll be framework. There's no wording yet. It could be some framework convention on global plastic treaty. That's what some are speculating. And if there is some agreement, next year there is going to be a meeting of ministers. Right now we just have delegations, where there are experts and representatives from various ministries as far as India is concerned. But if this there is certain agreement on the contours of this framework agreement, next year there will be meetings by ministers, and they will officially sign in this kind of convention. And
Right.
after
So, which
this,
means the current meeting, if I understand from you, the negotiators over there from all these countries are actually not, they're more at the bureaucratic level, is it?
yes, absolutely. And there
Okay.
is no ministers over here. But next year,
Right.
if there will be ministers, and they will, if they decide to, they will sign the convention. There is a quorum. I mean, so the current agreement, and again, this is all being drafted. If that once
Yeah.
there are 50 countries that actually sign in, it will become a proper convention. And
Right.
after that you will have your first cop. Then after that there will be a cop 1, and then it can just go on and on. And why this is significant, that's what Inger Anderson also referred to, is that she's basically saying we can't wait this long as far as plastic is concerned.
Right. Right.
Because
Absolutely.
in fact the UNEA resolution very clearly says that we have to address plastic waste pollution across the life cycle of plastic.
Right.
Now these are all
Right.
contentious terms, and it also has to include marine pollution. so
Right.
there
Right.
is so these are the two emotive aspects, just as we think of the rising seas, in the climate change context, and the temperature rise, which are like the two headline bulwarks of the climate, what captures the
Yeah.
popular understanding of it. Here it is pollution and health hazards, which are the immediate matters of concern to people, which is what is driving the urgency as far as this particular treaty or proposed treaty is concerned.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting that you say that because as you rightly pointed out, from 1992 to 2015, more than 2 decades, and here we are. And thank you for correcting me. At the fifth meeting, within 2 years, you've
Yeah,
already begun talking about. But what I was just listening to you, I was also thinking, plastic pollution is so relatable for everyone, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah,
unlike the sort of convincing that the world needed about what global warming meant,
yeah,
and the sort of scientific framing which was
yes,
required, which has taken so many years, and yet today we actually are in a
yeah,
sad situation where there's a climate denier who's going to be the president of the most powerful economy in the world. So
yeah,
unlike all of that, plastic is one of the most
yes,
used item that mankind has produced. It's most certainly one of the most useful items as well. We cannot deny
absolutely.
that. Like, I mean, right from our food packaging to the upholstery in the cars that we drive,
Yeah,
um, to just about. I mean,
including the car frames themselves and anything that you phones, anything you can think of. Yeah,
and the laptops we use,
yeah,
just about everything. And then of course in the past few years, there have been these scary videos on of ocean plastic pollution, where you have literally like forests, or like floating forests of plastic in the Pacific
yes,
Ocean. Of course, despite, I mean, we don't really have to go that far, unlike the way the sort of the
yeah,
scary ozone hole, as it was discussed decades ago. We actually just have to look outside our windows when we drive across. There's just plastic everywhere. It's actually
yeah.
just as much plastic on the earth. So do you think, given that this is so much more relatable, that this could potentially lead to much more impactful outcomes, and lead
Yeah.
to these 50 countries signing on?
Absolutely, that's very well put. In fact, just go back briefly, in fact, it was only after, even when the COPs were very much underway, there was still massive skepticism as far as the reality of climate change was concerned. I'm sure you also very well understand. But as you pointed out, in this case, there is a general agreement that there is this thing called plastic pollution. Now, for across countries, nobody really doubts the the eyesoreness that plastic pollution comes, and that's why this there is a general agreement that single-use plastics, are they are a sign of the consumptive lives that we also lead.
Lead.
But
Yeah.
we are also, I mean, right from our school days, we are, even as children, we are kind of ingrained into the fact that plastic is, it stays into the soil and does not degrade and can stay on for 1,000 years. And marine pollution is of course something which is less visible to most people,
Right. Right.
your island nations. And as you pointed out, the great plastic dumps that are formed in the Pacific at several points. But we have also been increasingly kind of tuned to visuals of animals, and it can be all of the
Yeah. Yeah.
relax,
Absolutely. Right.
and now whales, and of having plastics inside inside their stomachs. So all of this is one aspect. That is why there is a general consensus on plastic pollution, and we have to do something about it. We have to rein in waste. But from what I see so far, that is all that countries are agreed upon. Because
Right.
mentioned earlier, the resolution, the UNEA resolution, it has wording which says dealing with the entire life cycle of plastic waste. Now, as these negotiators over here are people who go every word line by line, comma by comma. So now
Right. Right.
a big dispute or underlying tension that is happening over here is, can we really address plastic waste? Can we actually go about reining in plastic, you know doing reuse, recycling, as we've all been told is a prescription for addressing plastic waste? Can we really do that without cutting plastic production? And
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Right. Right.
topic that is really dividing countries, especially countries that are very much reliant on
On plastic.
petroleum refining. India too is has a huge petroleum refining sector. Then there are countries like the West Asian countries which are major petro states.
Right.
So there are concern. I've been hearing and I've been witnessing some of these negotiations, including even the plenary sections, where everybody's agreed on recycle and reuse, and we have to do a bit about waste. But
The three
should we
R's,
be
right?
yeah,
Recycle, reuse, reduce. Reduce is
reduce
reduce is
three?
kind of where the
Yeah.
problem
So
lies.
that is a tough thing. And will this, and again it comes back to the old, then it comes back to familiar climate frameworks that can should countries reduce their coal emissions or oil and gas emissions, and therefore deny themselves the developmental benefits that I don't know, the developed world has gleaned so far. And then comes in those familiar questions of fairness. Then comes in those questions of the so-called common but differentiated responsibilities, which India had articulated first, but now is like at the frame of the UNFCCC convention, and
Right.
many
Right.
developing countries abide by. So this is one reason why, in fact, in the latest version of the text, this is not even like a COP draft text. This is like a pre-text text. I don't even know what to if there's a right
Yeah.
word to
A
describe it.
draft
It's
is a
called a
draft.
non-paper. It's called a non-paper actually in the
Okay.
UN parlance, but it's actually
A
a kind of basic
non-paper.
test. Yeah,
Right.
and they have in fact not even decided things like what is the definition of plastic, I mean, or
Oh wow. Oh.
therefore what's the definition of microplastic, because apparently each of these words, once you define it, will then have consequences on what countries must do. But again,
Right.
there is a agreement that whatever comes has to be legally binding, and the
Yeah.
hope
Right.
is that eventually we have this agreement, which over the years will undergo refinement. But
Yeah.
very much like how in COP28, we got in wording which said transition away from fossil fuel, which was
Yeah.
the highlight of COP of the Dubai COP last year. The aim, but it is not spelled out yet. The aim here is one day we are going to see the end of plastic. And as you also just said, it is not just the plastic covers that we think of as plastic pollution, right? All the sachets and all of those things, but actually it's underlined in every major component, from the pipes to our laptops to computers. So are we really aware of the consequences of a world where we have to probably invent entirely new things to
That's right. That's
replace
right.
the
Yeah.
replace the usefulness and ubiquity of plastics? Because plastics themselves, where I mean, they are a consequence of the fossil fuel, of the petrochemical
It's a
industry, that
byproduct of the
of
petrochemical.
the past 100 odd years or 150
Yeah.
odd years. But
Yeah.
those things that time were sold as things which are better than, let's say, glass as receptacles for food and
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
beverages.
Yeah.
And they were cheap. They enabled the poorer people to access commodities and consume goods that
Right.
that were denied to them because of uh, you know the use of other materials which were not perhaps as easily amenable to transport, recycling, etc. But now
Yeah.
it's become so big, and now the argument has turned. Now plastic is the evil, is being
Yeah.
is the evil that, and this is at the heart of this debate.
Yeah. Okay. So, again, I'm going to come back to this question. So, unlike, so if we are going to come, like you say, let's think of a scenario where we have actually finally the non-paper
Mhm.
becomes a paper, and
Yeah,
then and then we actually finally have actual wording of defining what a microplastic is and a plastic is, and etc.
yeah.
Would we then come to a similar COP-like scenario where we ask nations to voluntarily set goals?
Anything can happen. Yes,
Is
so
that
that is
okay?
what, so that is going to be that, so once we have this paper, the non-paper becoming the paper, that will be the equivalent of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And
I
after
see.
that, periodically, countries are going to meet. Right now there are like 170 signatories. I mean, people, not signatories, negotiating countries. And
Right.
they are going to be periodic cops. Now they could be cops that are, they could be once in 2 years. Like there is the equivalent cop on biological diversity, which is far less
That's
talked
great.
about and does not have
Yes.
as much media exposure as the climate cops. There is a cop on desertification, which
Yeah.
again happens biannually, and it's happening in fact this year in Saudi Arabia. Again, something that few people actually pay
Actually
much
follow.
attention
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
But this is plastic. This is already a massive industry, and there are going to be huge losers and winners, out
Yeah.
of this,
Absolutely. Right.
so
Right.
therefore, I mean, we don't know the what will be the eventual periodicity of these kind of cops, but they will be frequent, they will be recurrent. And each of these cops will push needles incrementally, even though again it's going to be that whole battle of the commas versus the semicolons. But
Yeah. Right.
but
Right.
the thing is, it will, like, for example, the climate cops have pushed sentiment from skepticism to widespread acknowledgement that climate change is real, and therefore transitions into the energy, the growth of renewable energy systems, the
Right.
reality of things like carbon credits. So this also will probably come up with restrictions on, countries have to ensure that they have to take inventories of how much plastic is produced, what are the different grades of plastic, and countries probably will have to come up with targets and prove to some UN supervised body that yes, we have recycled so much of this grade of plastic. Who knows? There could
Yeah.
be plastic credits. I mean, if companies are going to actually get targets that you as an individual entity have to uh, show this much plastic waste reuse or even reduction, then there will probably be a trading system in that. We have an EPR based extended producer responsibility system in place in
I see.
India itself, for packaging, for reusing and
Right.
recycling
Yes.
packaging.
Of course.
But it is not very effective yet, simply because of the, I guess, what government officials here call starting troubles, or
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's not really become this effective at reining in plastic production and consumption per se.
So, are there learnings that people might be taking from COP into here
Yeah.
in the sense of how things should not be done, right? Like, for instance, um, uh, the sheer delay in agreeing on just the syntax and the grammar and the language of it.
Yes.
Do we uh, is there a greater sense of urgency, because we already spoke about how relatable it is and how little
Hmm.
convincing people might require to reduce this? One is that, and secondly, as you already pointed out, in this case, unlike climate change, which is an entire phenomenon, this is very particular to a sector, a very particular to a tangible product, which is the
Hmm.
outcome. Right? Plastic
Yes.
is an actual commodity. Um, are there conversations about what a transition out of plastic might look like? Like, what are the other comparable material or
Hmm.
materials which could replace plastic in the sort of scale that plastic has come to occupy in the supply chain and value chain of just about any production
Yeah.
cycle that we have today?
So again, these are all issues that will come up, but as they say, these are all the kind of things that will be discussed in actual COPs. I mean, plastic COPs, when they will actually
I
come.
see. Uh-huh.
In
I see
fact,
what you mean. Yeah.
I have not heard any conversation around, at least at in the form of the text or something. There is no mention of words like bioplastic or compostable plastic. Though there
Compostable
are,
plastic,
but there are
etc.
many, but there are industry groups here. There are environmentalist groups over here, and they are like in climate cops, they are articulating several varied positions. There are some groups which say that maybe we have techno solutions like bioplastic, compostable plastic, but others say it'll be years before they are even proven to be effective.
In fact,
Like
right.
the technology isn't developed. Some of them say forget all of these new, we don't know about new alternatives to plastic, but they advocate going back to earlier systems. Like, for example, there are people who talk about things like, oh, let's go back to having Coke in glass bottles, as we all did, at least in your and my childhood, Kunal.
Yeah, yeah,
That
right.
was about the next generation. But we were familiar with glass bottles of Coke. So they say we should probably go back to things like that, more having milk delivered again in bottles as opposed to
Bottles as opposed
cartons
to
and
plastic
Tetra packs.
covers.
So
Right,
some of
right.
them are advocating the a not unusual stance of going back to things as they were, which might mean different things for different economies and countries. And but again, all of these positions, they open up their own can of worms in trying to, because they could lead to newer and newer scenarios and even problems, I dare say.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, these are all things that are going to be, which will form the nub of all of these things. But the aim of this treaty as of now is that plastic pollution is bad. Let us we have to we have to evolve a legal treaty to ensure that plastic pollution is a thing of, I mean, that is the evil that we have to
We have to
address.
sort of
And
squarely recognize the evil and decide that we
yeah,
need to end this evil. This
yeah,
is the
even
basic.
naming it as an evil thing, because there are some countries which actually are articulating positions that say plastic waste is bad, plastic is not, which is a very, it's a
I
typical,
see.
a very familiar response of the petrochemicals and plastics industry, which is a $1 billion enterprise. So
Right,
they
yeah.
have been saying this, that plastics are not bad. It's yeah, it's the plastic waste that's a problem. I guess it reminds me of the whole NRA position on guns. I guess guns don't kill, but people do. So
Yeah,
there are
they
really
just
debates
don't,
on things like that.
they yeah,
But
yeah.
you
They
talk
don't, they
to
don't.
countries who are like small island countries, Tuvalu, Fiji,
Right, yeah.
island nations. So these people want drastic, quick action as far as plastics are concerned, because they say we are already encountering marine littering. We
Sure.
are already having a problem with that. So we can't wait for our countries and economies to be consumed while you guys just debate on the merits of different kinds of plastic.
Right, excellent. So from what you're saying, I mean, we're at 20, almost 25, and ideally, we sort of like to keep it for half an hour. We usually open this up for comments, but I don't think there have been many comments or interactions. Um, you did mention that industry groups are present at these meetings. So when you say industry groups, I'm assuming
Plus,
manufacturers of plastics or by refiners of
yeah, even
petrochemicals,
oil producers.
oil
You have the
producers
Exxon
like
Mobil's.
Exxon or BP, or so they.
Some of them, some of them wear their. I mean, they declare themselves so. Some are like lobbying groups. So how this works is, there are member committees. There are committees. There are what is called contact groups, where
Mhm.
all countries have their formal representatives. Each contact. There are four contact groups. Each contact group has to. They discuss all the issues surrounding plastic, all the things that we just mentioned are basically into four buckets. So countries try to resolve issues among themselves is that they can evolve a text or paragraphs of text called articles, and
I
they try
see.
to achieve consensus paragraph by paragraph in these contact groups. Now these contact groups, they talk openly, but the understanding is that what we discuss openly follow Chatham House rules. Nobody can be quoted, and so that positions can be expressed freely. But there is a whole set
Right.
of observers, and observers can include anybody from industry, registered industry people, to even registered civil society organizations, environmental groups, indigenous people groups, etc. So they are allowed to observe, hear, take notes, and but again,
Right.
nobody can actually report on. The media is not allowed, is not counted as an observer over here.
In these
So
okay.
because it's not supposed to be technically public over here. So this is the so there are, so everybody knows what's happening, and there are concerns and criticisms that, oh, are the fossil fuel groups trying to delay progress towards the adoption of a treaty?
Right.
So those
Right.
similar concerns that we raised in
At COPs,
in
at
the
climate
climate
COPs.
at COPs and climate conferences are emerging here too, and it is not surprising, but it all adds to the essential dynamism of this the nature of these negotiations over here.
Right. So let me just come to a couple of more questions and then we'll close. India, I believe, was at the founding of this, if you will, at the first meeting in March 2022. And what has been India's role, or what has been India's position, and
Yeah.
what's the kind of leadership that it's taking?
So India was, of course, part of the contract compact of countries that agreed to the resolution to end plastic pollution, in
Right.
2022. So there is an Indian delegation over here. I count there are from the environment ministry, there are people from the Ministry of Chemicals and petrochemicals, and Ministry of Commerce. So we have governmental delegations to over, memberships from these, so they are part of a delegating team. So India so far has made some, I mean, the only publicly available submissions that India has made has been only one, and that is it has discussed an aspect called the finance mechanism. So this is India is echoing a stand that it has generally made in climate COPs, saying
Right.
that if at all we decide to move away from plastics, to control plastics, then this will entail costs,
Right.
and developed countries must take the lead in paying for the costs. For these costs, they must engage in transfer of technology so that developing countries, and that includes India, can can switch to
Right. Right.
alternatives, but
Right.
without paying costs. So very, very similar to what we articulate in in the climate
Yeah, at the climate.
negotiations. India,
Although it's just, yeah,
if I could just complete that one more point. Another
yeah,
point India actually continuously raises on is less to do with the plastic dynamics, but on the structure of the negotiations per se. India has formally once its second one submission is there. It said that we have to ensure that everything proceeds by consensus. And that is what
Right.
makes all of these cops very, I mean, typical or unique in their own way, because every country has exactly the same amount of voice. There is nothing like a vote. I mean, till now, there's even the concept of voting to at least move something through does not exist in UN COP negotiations. Only if everybody is agreed on every line can things move forward. So India is
Right.
kind of insistent that those rules are maintained in these COP in this negotiations too. So these are the two essential points in which India has kind of made its positions clear.
So it's interesting. It's actually going back to the sort of playbook that it has followed at COP, which
Yeah.
is like, developing nations again are at a disadvantage.
Yes.
Funding and transfer of technology is required. Although, so this is what I was going to come to. In the case of plastics, and of course, there's of course the fact that many other countries, developed countries, have used plastics more ubiquitously before it began
Yeah.
becoming mainstream here. But the technology to produce it is now quite widespread. At least the
Yes.
basic production of plastics. And um, could the same argument of historical baggage really be applied to plastic elimination? That's Yeah, and how receptive are developed countries to that?
So again, something that has not been articulated by countries themselves, but the nub of this argument in the to stretch the climate analogy into this space, the argument is that you are thanks to the consumerist economy that we are all kind of part of. It is because plastics cheapen the production of a wide variety of goods, and because they cheapen the cost of goods, they are affordable to a wider and wider swath of population who are increasingly richer and can take and can avail of these goods, but are not rich enough to afford, I
The
guess,
alternative to
the
plastic.
alternative, like coming back to the milk example. There are, for example, in Bang, we have some, let's say, a company like Country Fresh or Country Delight, which provides milk in containers, but it has its own local reuse and recyclable system. But that is more expensive than a sachet of
It's more expensive.
Amul
It's the
milk.
whole organic versus the
The
non-organic
organic.
sort of
Absolutely. So
consumer
the thing is,
practices. Yeah.
so one argument is that can a country be denied? Can it deny its people, the right to consume and exert free choice, in the kind of goods that they are doing, uh, by imposing by artificially making things more expensive, for them, if we
Yeah.
use alternate goods. So that is one thing. But another more interesting argument is that people say that what if you choose an alternative product? Let's say you do find some magical alternative product which is, I
Yes.
don't know, cheaper and more sustainable than plastic.
Yeah.
Wouldn't then expanding that into global systems then
Yeah.
entail its own set of environmental challenges? Like, what if
Absolutely. Its own
glass
carbon
became
footprint.
exactly what if glass becomes the new plastic? I mean, surely, because it's another natural product, won't it lead to rise of, when you're producing more of it, it could lead to emissions in other ways. So
Could
another
lead
way
to
is
more
maybe,
landmine.
as and this is something which India, even Prime Minister Modi actually has articulated in forums, this whole argument that lifestyle for emissions, the lifestyle for sustainability, I'm sorry. So where,
Right. Yeah.
at one essence, India is a country which actually has very low per capita consumption per se.
Right.
Of course, a
Yeah.
consequence of the poverty, that
Yeah.
is so prevalent still with us. But it is because Western habits and consumption patterns have led to the crisis that we reach for the cheapest, lowest common denominator in terms of the materials we use, and
Yeah.
plastic therefore subsidizes this extreme consumption. So
Right.
to solve the plastic problem, should we be reducing consumption? And what is that? Again, that should the developed countries take a lead in reducing consumption,
Consumption itself as a, yeah, the whole
as
paradigm of consuming less, and also
consuming
should
less?
then the developing countries also take the lead on ensuring that they are more responsible in not consuming products which
Yes,
are has more plastic, let's say.
has more
uh,
plastic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and are willing to pay more for that. That's a really, so it's actually much more complex. There is a dynamic of rich versus poor,
Everything.
um,
Yeah.
availability of resources, what is there and what is not, and all of that comes into play. So it's
Yes.
in as much as there's a recognition and
Yes.
relatability, the fact that plastic is a menace, it is, there is this
Hmm.
whole set of issues, the ecosystem that needs to be addressed, and in as equitable manner as possible. So let's actually take a quick break now, in the sense that we this as our webinars have normally been are interactive, so we have some comments. So if we can maybe flash, get our team to flash a comment on the screen. Um, so.
Yeah.
Someone says, "Can you cannot eliminate plastic completely? A Montreal type convention on single-use plastic will work." Is this something that is being spoken about?
Not yet, but the Montreal Convention is seen as the gold standard on a treaty that involved multiple countries, where they were actually, able to come together and, fix the, I mean, at least address the ozone, the ozone hole,
Yeah, right.
in
The ozone
and
hole. Yeah.
through the through the regulation of hydrofluorocarbons. So it is
Yes.
all the UN uh, establishment has always said that if that is one example of why something like a global treaty can
Yeah.
work, because it has worked in the case of this thing. But single use plastic is actually the least of the problems. The problem, because as I said, everybody knows that the plastic spoons and the wrapping paper is, I mean, they are an eyesore, and they are something that can be,
But then we
they are
actually already
something every.
have replacements. Interestingly, there's that push
Yeah,
socially.
we have a we have a
Yeah,
law on single use plastic, and there are nearly
in
22
India, for
categories of
instance.
items
Yes.
that are banned. But again, it comes with its own economical challenges. Those plastics are fairly light, because of which there is less incentive for waste pickers to actually collect them.
Right.
And that and they would rather go in for heavier plastics, which fetch them more money on the informal market and can be reused and recycled again. So I'm not
Right.
sure how a Montreal type convention can actually aim it. Over here, as we were discussing, the aim really is much bigger, sources of plastic, and trying to cut plastic production itself, which is like the ultimate, the gold standard of aspirations
Right.
over
Right.
here.
Right. So legally binding is basically where. So what do we mean by legally binding? It's not going to be voluntary, but it's actually going to be fixed per country. Is it? What is
So
that?
all
What is the?
countries, yeah, so all countries have to take steps to, they have to enact and enforce legislation to
I
cut
see.
plastic pollution. So
I
that is
see.
what a legally binding treaty, where the countries are legally bound to take action.
To take
uh,
action. We don't
so
know
they
the
will have to
contours of.
introduce their own, they will have to introduce their own enforcement, or at least legislation,
Right.
to get
Yeah.
it done. And
So
India is
basically,
seen as one of
law.
the leaders for single use plastic, but and it is also mentioned in some of the fora that I have been witness to. But their point is many other countries have to take equivalent or more ambitious steps.
Right. 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 Okay. So that explains that. Excellent. So thank you so much, Jacob, for making time. And you're there for
No.
another few days, and hopefully, maybe on Friday, as we've been discussing, we can probably have another of this webinar. This has been really
Sure.
insightful, and it looks like a rather momentous meeting, and it might actually have an impact. Hopefully, it has an impactful outcome. So thanks so much for joining us from Busan in South Korea. And thank you all for our viewers who've been tuning in. If you want to tune in more for such webinars, do follow us on your favorite social media platforms. I'm Kunal Shankar from Chennai. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.